Even as a child, I was told that I was a handsome boy and that I would have to fight off all the girls when I grew up. I remember making faces at the thought that I had anything to do with them. Having a younger and older sister kind of told me that girls were more trouble than they were worth. I was christened Andrew Napier, but everyone called me Andy. My mom and dad were the best parents in the world. They loved each other and never fought, at least when we were around. My mother, a slender, beautiful, and graceful brunette, had a heart of gold. We children were pampered, but also taught everything that would help us in the future. My father was a real pillar of strength, strong, handsome, hardworking, and with a sense of humor that often left us confused. Perhaps the most important thing we have learned is respect for ourselves and others, and to treat others the way we would like to be treated. My father was always polite and considerate towards members of the opposite sex, and the same values were passed down to me. So when I started the inevitable dates, I in turn treated the girls with some respect, which I think surprised them a little. I didn't do the usual mischievous things that boys usually do, and this, along with my good looks, served me very well among the girls. My father was an electrician, and when I left school, he took me under his formidable wing as an apprentice. We worked well together, had a lot of laughs, and tomfoolery continued to work very hard together. On your 25th birthday, he told me that he was retiring early and that the business belonged to me, although he helped me with some of the larger jobs that I could not handle alone. These years will be some of the best of my life, because I was young, healthy, and motivated, and had money to burn. It's not like I'm actually burning money. Being frugal and saving money for rainy days is another thing my parents instilled in me. I dated countless girls over the years, but as I got older, I started looking for something more. I began to want a relationship that was more than just sex and a good time. But it wasn't until I first saw Danielle that I thought I had found this person. The problem was that after our first date, she didn't want anything from me. We first met at a friend's party. I will never forget the moment she walked through the door, her poise, her confidence, and her big smile. She was tall, with long, blonde, wavy hair and a figure full of luscious curves. Her jeans are skinny enough to highlight her strong, long legs. Our eyes finally met and held for a few seconds before she looked away. But from time to time that night her eyes met mine, and eventually we were drawn to each other. That evening we talked a lot amid the noisy party, and although we talked with friends, we were most interested in each other. We parted that evening enthusiastically, exchanging phone numbers, and then met up for drinks a couple of evenings later. In my opinion, our first date was promising, but my request for a second was politely declined. I was a little surprised by her answer, not as an insult, but because I was sure that she liked me as much as she did. After that, I called Danielle several times, we talked, and in the end, she agreed to meet me at a cafe. After some time, I plucked up courage and asked her why she didn't want to see me. Danielle confirmed that she did find me attractive, but didn't want to compete for me and didn't want to share me. I asked for an explanation, and this is how she put it, bluntly. She noticed how other girls looked at me and sometimes flirted. Rumor had it that I was a dateable guy who played on multiple fronts. Danielle said outright that she gave herself entirely to her man and expected the same in return, and in her opinion, I was a bad option. I let her speak without interrupting, and then explained my view of the situation. I said that I was fascinated by her at first sight. After admitting that I had actually dated different girls in the past, I explained that I just hadn't found one I wanted to stay with long term. I assured her that I could be faithful and that all I wanted was the opportunity to prove that I deserved her attention. I could feel her searching my eyes for confirmation of sincerity before she gave me a small smile. This was enough for Danielle to agree to start dating me, and I was the happiest person in the world. We did everything that new couples usually do. Walked along the beaches, went to the cinema, had dinner in restaurants. I never tried to get her into bed, although it was never far from my thoughts. We limited ourselves to holding hands and occasionally kissing goodbye. I was definitely trying to be on my best behavior. I will never forget the first time we made love. Danielle came to see me on Saturday morning. I had worked late the night before and was too tired to meet. We sat in the living room on a large sofa, which was positioned to catch the warm morning sun. It ended with us making love. Outside of the bedroom, Danielle was a wonderful friend. She was beautiful, smart, and cheerful, with a constant smile on her face. She was affectionate without being too intrusive, and I was proud to have her by my side. Although she loved going out to parties, she was also quite content to spend time watching movies or reading a good book. She was incredibly independent, and although she often stayed with me, she was not willing to give up her room in her sister's house, where she lived before we met. It seemed like she needed to have a place to come back to if things didn't work out for us. But as the months passed, our relationship became more comfortable and stable. I had nothing to do with other girls, and when we were together, I always gave her all the attention she deserved, and she returned the same to me. We had been together for almost a year when Danielle mentioned that she wanted to travel. She always dreamed of going to Europe and wanted to do it before settling in one place. When I explained that I couldn't just close my business and go with her, Danielle became a little depressed about the whole thing. We discussed this over the following weeks and eventually came to the conclusion that she should go without me. She managed to persuade her sister Shari to go with her, and preparations began. They had booked a Kentucky tour and were going to work in London for a while. The closer the day of departure approached, the more we both feared for our future. As much as I wanted her to stay, I loved her too much to stop her. For her part, Danielle didn't want to lose me forever. We didn't make promises to be faithful to each other, knowing it was too difficult, but we promised to stay in touch and see what the future brings, hoping that one day we'll be together again. On a rainy Sunday morning, I kissed my dear Danielle one last time before she walked through the airport doors. I can't explain how lost I felt without Danielle in my life. It seemed like I no longer had a purpose on this earth. I missed her company, her smell and laughter, her exquisite caresses and gentle touches. I was lost and miserable. I threw myself into work to forget myself. But true friends should not be underestimated, and I was soon dragged out to parties and get-togethers. Over the next months, I realized that my ability to attract the opposite sex had not waned, and I had numerous women. But when I woke up the next morning, it wasn't Danielle next to me, and my interest quickly faded, no matter how beautiful they were. And every time Danielle called me from some exotic place in the world, my despair returned. My life took an interesting turn when I met Larry. I had the job of laying wiring in one of the rooms of his house, which he was converting into an office. Although it was not a large order, it was quite complex as Larry asked that all the wires be hidden so that they would not be visible. In the end, we agreed on how this could be done, and I set to work with my usual perseverance. During the 2 days that I was there, we managed to get to know each other better and communicated quite friendly. When I asked what he did, I was surprised to learn that he and his wife owned a high-end escort agency. He laughed out loud at my reaction and then talked a little about how business works in this industry with its positive and negative aspects. When Larry asked me if I would like to work as an escort, at first I thought he was joking and laughed. But he was serious and said that a person with my appearance would be in demand. I replied that my credentials weren't great and that clients would be disappointed when my pants fell down. He shrugged and said that most of his clients were more interested in good company. At first, I was not at all interested in this, but over time Larry was able to arouse my interest. It wasn't about the money, but rather the whole idea of meeting women in order to then go to bed with them. A couple of days later, Larry and I met over a few drinks and discussed the possibility of my involvement in the work. I didn't remember everything he said then, but here's what stuck in my memory. First, women want to be treated like they are on a date. A significant part of clients are married business women who want to get attention away from home. They like the services of escorts, where the man looks good, is charming, but without excess. Most people like to be taken to restaurants where they can size up a man in a safe, public setting and decide whether they want to proceed or not. They prefer good, intelligent conversation with a touch of humor and lightness. The golden rule is to never pry into their personal life, but if they tell you something themselves, it is acceptable. Usually, if everything goes well, you will be invited to their hotel room, and here the man must be very careful. Any sexual innuendo must come from the client, and I must ensure that this is always the case. If it goes further, then you should know in advance about preferences and boundaries. After sex, most women prefer the escort to leave soon after. You should never assume that you will stay the night. Women can be weird about this, Larry explained. Sometimes things can go wrong, and in such cases, it is better to politely say goodbye and leave. At the end of our conversation, Larry asked to show his hands. He then explained that women can't stand being touched by dirty or rough hands, or if your nails are broken. He suggested getting a manicure before meeting a client. It was something I hadn't thought about before, but I knew he was 100% right. A few days later, Larry called me and told me I had my first order. It was Maria, a very nice lady who had already used his services several times. I was to meet her in room 219 at the Escort Hotel at 8 in the evening. She wanted to be taken to dinner. Larry had made advance reservations at Ramsay's restaurant a few steps away from the hotel. That same afternoon, I went to the hotel to look around in advance and avoid awkward situations. Then I found a restaurant. Taking note of all the details, I went and got my nails done for the first time in my life. I can't remember the last time I was as nervous as I was when I showered, shaved, and got dressed that evening. Then I looked at myself critically in the mirror and finally headed to the car. 10 minutes later, with my heart beating wildly, I knocked on the door of room 219 at the Escort Hotel and prayed that Attila the Hun would not open the door. My prayers were answered. The door was answered by an attractive brunette whose warm smile immediately calmed my fears. "Hi, I'm Maria, and I hope you're Andy." "Hello, Maria." "Yes, I'm Andy." We looked at each other for a few seconds before Maria turned and picked up her leather purse. "Let's go eat, I'm dying of hunger," she said, heading towards the exit. With professional precision, I escorted her to Ramsay's, and we were soon seated at a table overlooking the city lights. My excitement quickly faded as our conversation became increasingly casual, despite the obvious presence of an engagement ring and a large diamond on her hand. Maria was an attractive woman, probably several years older than me. Her short curly hair framed her oval face with large eyes. Pastel pink lipstick, matching her blouse, adorned her full lips. She was significantly shorter than me, but her figure looked seductive in tight black trousers, and her breasts were squeezed under her blouse. She was very friendly and cheerful, and our conversation covered a variety of topics while we ate and polished off 2 bottles of wine. "Andy, how long have you been doing this?" she asked over dessert. "No, not really," I answered honestly. "You are a very attractive young man, and I would love to take you back to the hotel." "I wouldn't mind," I laughed. "I love everything slowly and sensually. I love it when I'm seduced." "Can you do it?" she asked. "Without a doubt." Maria picked up her bag from the floor and stood up. "Well, we're wasting time here." A few minutes later, we were back in room 219. "Are you a happy boy now?" she asked. "Absolutely," I replied with a wide smile. "And you?" "I'm fine. What more could a woman want?" We sat on the bed for a while, talking and enjoying the cool beer Maria brought. She was not shy about her nudity, relaxingly sipping her drink. I liked her confident and relaxed behavior. Maria was pleased with herself and did not hide it. Finally, she politely made it clear that she needed some rest, and I decided it was time to leave. I got dressed, feeling light and satisfied, ready to say goodbye. At the door, Maria stopped me and gave me a goodbye kiss, promising that we would see each other again. The next day, Larry called me and asked me to come see him. I thought that perhaps something had gone wrong, and he was going to tell me off, although I did not understand what the question could be. When I came to his house at 6 in the evening after a day of work, he greeted me with a wide smile and invited me to sit down. He took 2 bottles of beer from the small refrigerator and pointed to the chair opposite him. "Have a seat," said Larry. "Well, how did it go yesterday?" "Everything seems fine," I replied, remembering how I tried to follow his instructions. "I did everything as you said, and Maria seemed pleased." Larry smiled, reached for the bottle, and took a sip. "Yes, I heard that too." She said you were good in bed and that you had a nice time. I laughed, feeling relieved. Yes, I had a good time too. She is a wonderful woman. At that moment, I heard footsteps outside the door, and when it opened, I was surprised to see Maria enter the room, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. Larry turned to her and said, "Andy, this is my wife Maria, although I think you already know each other." I froze in surprise, not knowing what to say. Maria came up to me and kissed me on the cheek, smiling. "Hello, Andy. Thanks for last night." I looked at Larry, who watched my reaction with a smile. "Don't worry, Andy," he said, laughing. "Maria always checks new guys before we allow them to work with clients. We just want to make sure they behave as expected." "And you behaved perfectly," Maria added. "You were gallant and caring, as you should be." I felt the tension lift from my shoulders and smiled as I joined in their conspiracy game. This is how my career as an escort began. I received 1 or 2 assignments a week, which was quite enough. The demand for men was not as high as for women, but that was more than enough for me. I liked meeting women who were willing to pay for sex, and I almost never encountered bad situations. The clients were different, some attractive, others not so much, but I always tried. A few months later, Larry and Maria invited me to a party, which was an opening for me in the world of sex. Over the next year, my life was busy with work and social activities. Most assignments fell on weeknights, although there were the occasional Saturday nights. Over time, my thoughts about Danielle began to appear less and less often in my head. We still kept in touch, mostly through email, but our messages became increasingly infrequent. In addition to working as an escort, I met other women and, if possible, entered into relationships with them. However, I noticed that I became less emotionally involved with women. Sometimes it bothered me, but most of the time I didn't care because I was enjoying life. I kept my work a secret from my friends because I knew it would cause problems. I always chose restaurants that were far from where I usually went to avoid meeting someone I knew. Fortunately, this never happened. Most Friday nights I met up with friends at the Appaloosa, a popular and lively bar downtown. We usually stayed until closing and then continued drinking at someone's house. If we were lucky, we would bring a couple of girls with us with the hope of hooking up. This Friday night was no exception, and I was standing in a group of people when I felt someone's arm wrap around mine and heard a very familiar voice right next to my ear. "Hey, mister, want to buy this girl a drink?" I looked down at Danielle's smiling face, and my heart fluttered 1,000 times. "Jesus, what are you doing here?" I asked. I never received a response because Danielle was immediately surrounded by people welcoming her. I stepped aside and began to look at her furtively. She had changed. Her hair was cut almost to the roots, but it still looked good on her. The jeans hugged her figure tightly, but she had clearly lost some weight. The black leather boots gave her a couple of extra centimeters of height, making her taller than I remembered her. But most of all, I was interested in her manners, her wide smile and mischievous laugh, the way she spoke, gesturing with her hands. Finally, she turned to me again, looked me in the eyes, and, smiling, hugged me tightly. "I missed you," she whispered. "Me too. Would you like to drink something?" I asked. "Yes, but not here. Let's find a quiet place where we can talk." We said our goodbyes and left the Appaloosa, crossing the road to a small bar. After ordering drinks, we found a small table and made ourselves comfortable. "So how did you end up here?" I asked. Danielle smiled guiltily. "I lost my job, ran out of money, my sister moved in with her boyfriend, and now winter is coming. There wasn't much point in staying there, that's for sure. By the way, aren't you glad to see me?" "Of course, this is a great surprise," I said. Over the next half hour, Danielle told me about her travels around the UK and Europe. It seemed that she had a great time, but now she was tired from all this, and her home again attracted her. Eventually, the conversation turned to me. "How is your personal life? You were probably busy while I was away?" she asked. I shrugged. "Nothing special, mostly worked. And you?" Danielle looked at me nervously from behind her glass. "Maybe we can have a confession time. Do you think it's worth it? Maybe just to clear things up between us." Begin, I suggested. She leaned back in her chair and thought for a moment. The whole truth and only the truth. Yes, I had sex 4 times while I was away, Danielle said, with 3 different guys and twice with one. I wasn't particularly interested in these guys. I was just drunk and needed to relieve the tension. Now it's your turn. Now I'm thinking. I considered lying for about a second, but I hated lying. It would still come up later and could cause problems. If I was going to be honest, here's my chance. I quickly estimated that I had slept with more than 40 different women in the last 12 months. Many of them were regular clients of my work, and if we add casual acquaintances, we would get a decent number. Come on, spit it out, Danielle insisted. About 40. Magpie, she exclaimed. I worked a little as an escort, I answered quietly. Danielle just looked at me with a stunned look. You're kidding, right? I shook my head and told her how I met Larry and his little business proposal without going into detail. I have to give Danielle credit. She listened to me without interrupting. It's just disgusting. How could you do this? It was fun, I answered with dignity, and women willingly paid for my services. Maybe you should have paid for my services. Danielle laughed loudly. No way. You weren't good enough. I grinned at her across the table, and our eyes met as if time had stood still. I'm really glad to see you again, I said sincerely, wanting to change the subject. Mutually, but this whole story with the escort unsettled me. So tell me, why was this so interesting? Over the next 10 minutes, I told Danielle about some of my adventures. She listened intently, emptying her glass until I finished. Well, you certainly didn't convince me that you are the pure and innocent guy I left behind. You just made me excited, she commented with a smile. If you have money, I have time, I replied brazenly. She leaned across the table so that our faces were close to each other. Look, I can sleep with anyone whenever I want. The chance that I'll pay for this is 0, just know that, she said. Her face was so close to mine that I just leaned forward and kissed her. I think we should leave, she suggested, breaking away from the kiss. We soon found ourselves in my apartment and made love. Are you okay? I asked. I'm just happy, she replied. Tears flowed freely. The moment she had been waiting for had finally arrived. The man she loved more than anything in the world was by her side, and now nothing else mattered. She missed him desperately, his appearance, his humor, and his affection. She returned home with worry in her heart, afraid that he had found someone else, and that he would no longer want to be with her. She remembered how her heart had sank when her eyes had first found him in the Appaloosa a few hours ago. The thrill of his surprise when he saw her would forever be etched in her memory, as would the way his eyes roamed over her body as they sat at the bar. She wanted him in her arms from the first second, and now he was with her. It's good to be home, she whispered. It's good that you're back, I replied. We'll talk in the morning, okay? I thought you promised me something, I asked with a smile. It will depend on how you look in the morning, she said sleepily. If I remember correctly, in the morning you usually have a face like an old shoe. I laughed. And you look absolutely perfect, as I take it. Certainly. The truth was that Danielle really did look great this morning. She was pressed against me when I woke up the next morning, the sun shining through the curtains. She looked both beautiful and innocent, sleeping peacefully on her back. Even without makeup, her face remained smooth and attractive. Her short hair seemed neatly combed. I looked at her with pleasure, just happy that she was back in my life again. We were still lying in bed when she asked. I have a problem, she said, a problem with housing. You can live here, I suggested without hesitation. What does this even mean? She raised an eyebrow. What do you think this means? This means I want to have sex with you every night. I'm serious. I'm serious too. I want you to move in with me. You know what I'm asking, right? Her voice became softer. No, I pretended. Everything is the same as before. I want to be with you, but I won't tolerate cheating. You must be completely devoted to me. I looked into her eyes and smiled. I love you. These words were unexpected. Danielle looked at me, wondering if I was joking, but I wasn't. She looked at me with wide eyes, and I saw tears begin to flow down her cheeks. These were tears of relief and happiness. "I love you too," she whispered after a few seconds, her voice trembling with emotion. At that moment, I couldn't put into words how happy I was. Her return to my life felt like I had found my lost happiness again. Her affectionate nature, way of laughing, and always maintaining a cheerful atmosphere made every day special. Waking up next to her every morning, hugging her soft body was the perfect way to start the day. I also did my bit. No more escort work, and my eyes were fixed only on her. With each passing day, our relationship became stronger. Sexually, we had incredible chemistry. Perhaps it was because we could easily have never gotten back together, but now that we did, we enjoyed every minute of it. I think that the small betrayals that occurred during our breakup added some spice to our relationship. However, Danielle still had a hard time at first with the fact that I was working as an escort. She found it difficult to understand how I could sleep with women for money. A few months after Danielle returned, a funny thing happened. We were sitting in one of our favorite little Asian cafes. After the meal, we sat next to each other, flirting slightly in public, holding hands, looking into each other's eyes, and exchanging innocent kisses from time to time. At the next table sat two elderly, but very elegantly dressed ladies. We didn't pay any attention to them at first until one of them caught Danielle's attention. "What a nice young man you have," one of the women said with a mischievous smile. "Could you lend it to us for a while?" Danielle's eyes immediately met mine. "Well, maybe but her fingers instantly closed on my lips, silencing me. She looked at me with such a look that it seemed that I might not live to see the end of lunch if I continued to joke. "Don't even think about it," she said then, turning to the elderly ladies, she smiled sweetly. "Sorry, but he's all mine." The two ladies smiled knowingly, and one of them replied, "Good men are always busy. It's a pity, of course." We all laughed about it together, and the atmosphere became light and relaxed again. I have no doubt that Danielle and I intend to be together for a long time. We were both happy and content in our relationship and were ready to move on to the next stage of our lives. I knew that Danielle would be a wonderful mother, and her maternal instincts became stronger every day. Perhaps there was still some time left before this, but we were ready to walk this path together, step by step. Several months passed, and Danielle and I lived a calm and harmonious life. We continued to build our relationship, supporting each other and enjoying every moment spent together. I gradually pulled away from my past habits and worked as an escort, devoting myself entirely to Danielle and our future. We soon began discussing plans for a more serious future together, moving to a new house, the possibility of having children, and how we would manage our careers and personal goals. One warm summer evening, we sat on the terrace of our small but cozy house, drank wine, and enjoyed the sunset. I looked at Danielle, who was sitting next to me, her hair slightly tousled by the wind, and her eyes sparkling with that special fire that I always adored. Suddenly, she said quietly, as if thinking out loud, "Have you ever thought about what will happen next? What could be our next step?" I smiled, put my glass down, and looked into her eyes. "Of course," I answered. "I think about it every day. I want us to be together. I want us to build a family. You know I can't imagine my life without you." She smiled slightly, but a shadow of doubt flashed in her eyes. "I know," she answered quietly, "but I need to understand whether we are ready for this step. Children, home, it's not as simple as it might seem, especially after everything we've been through." I felt it was time for a more serious conversation. I stood up, stood in front of Danielle, got down on one knee, and looked into her eyes. "Daniel," I began, feeling my heart beat faster, "you are the best thing that happened in my life. I am ready to go with you to the end, despite all the difficulties, despite the past. I know I haven't been perfect, but I want to be the best for you. So I want to ask you, will you agree to marry me?" Her eyes widened in surprise and tears began to roll down her cheeks. She covered her mouth with her hand as if she couldn't believe her ears. A few seconds seemed like an eternity until she found the strength to answer. "Yes," she screamed, throwing herself into my arms. "Of course, yes. We hugged for a long time, laughing and crying at the same time. This moment was perfect, filled with joy and confidence in our future. We decided to start a new chapter of our lives together. The wedding took place a few months later in a small circle of close friends and family. It was a wonderful day. Flowers, laughter, music, and a lot of love. My parents sat in the front row, proud and joyful, as they watched their son finally find happiness. Danielle looked stunning in her dress, and I couldn't take my eyes off her the entire day. After the wedding, we went on our honeymoon to Italy, a country that Danielle had long dreamed of visiting. We enjoyed every moment exploring the narrow streets of Rome, savoring pasta and wine in Tuscany, and swimming in the warm sea of the Amalfi Coast. Once we returned home, we began planning the next stage of our lives. Danielle soon became pregnant, and this period became for us another step towards happiness and the fulfillment of our dreams. I supported her every step of the way, took care of her, and made plans for the future. 9 months later, our son was born, and I couldn't believe how much I could love another person. He was beautiful, just like his mother. We named him Evan, and with his arrival our lives changed forever. The days were filled with laughter, joy, and care for our baby. Years passed, and I realized more and more that Danielle and I's story is a story of overcoming, of love and loyalty. We've been through a lot, but that's what made us stronger. I looked at our life, at our family, at our home filled with happiness and children's laughter, and realized that everything that happened in the past led us to this moment. Every night before I went to sleep, I hugged Danielle and thanked fate for bringing her back into my life. And when Evan was growing up, I told him about the importance of following your heart and appreciating those you love. Life went on, and every day our love only became stronger. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one. Click to the next one.